So, the reference to the dotted lines in the earlier reading reminded me of when I was a young child. I would play the game, connect the dots. Anybody ever play that game when they were young? Yeah. There was something satisfying, I think, to me completing, something that is uncompleted. I don't know, it just fills some sort of psychological void, I think. And often, it's easy to see the outline of what the dots created before you actually connected them. Like, we know what this is. Although, to be honest with you, my children, when we lived in Florida, really had no idea what that was. And then sometimes they're more complex, almost like a Rorschach test, honestly, where only after making the connections does it become apparent what the picture is. And I would tell you life is a lot like that. Trying to connect the dots to figure out how to make things work out, to make things whole, to complete the vision that is within our minds. We sometimes know generally what our hoped-for outcome is, but it doesn't really come to fruition until we connect with others and the world to actually make it happen. And I think of our social justice team's restorative justice project trying to create a mental health court in Scott County as an alternative to prison for people with mental health needs. When we started this was based on our team that was working on mass incarceration and racial equity, and mass incarceration, racial equity, and drugs, mired. And so, we did a lot of education on this topic, read a lot of books, had a lot of discussions, brought in people to talk with us, and we kind of go, what are we going to do? So, as with most social justice work, what we do is we go into the community of people who are affected by the oppression, and we ask them, what is it they need? And of course, we were thinking, we're going to advocate for sentencing laws or legalizing marijuana, but the thing we kept hearing in the community time and again was that they needed mental health support. And I think it's interesting, our forum today, just coincidentally, is a health survey by somebody from Genesis is leading of that. So it's about, I think it's a good example actually of, sometimes what we think the picture is versus what the picture actually is can be different, and you can only really find out that picture by connecting with others and connecting the dots, so to speak. So members of our congregation, with Quad Cities Interfaith, many other congregations, judges, prosecutors, providers of mental health care, other mental health advocates, among others, are now on the path to making that a reality here in Scott County. A lot of hard work, but something that we could never do alone. We could only do by connecting the dots with others. I always look for these connections and try to pay attention to when and where they happen. I recently felt a sense of connection when preparing for this service. Each year, of course, the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee sends us these boxes called Guest at Your Table. And for years, I hope you will utilize them. I actually, for years, and I still do it, but it was better when my children were younger. We'd come and have dinner together. Now that they're older, we never have dinner together anymore. But we used to always just empty our pockets of change every night right before dinner into the box. And then whenever the box got filled during the year, we would go to the bank, put it in their coin machine, and send that money to UUSC. Just a way of being a reminder for us to be thankful, right, for the food that we eat, for the things that we have. It's a very tangible thing. But of course, as Martha told you, you can write a check or go online and help that way. But with the boxes always come these things called stories of hope. And what I like about these stories of hope is that they focus on something that has already come to fruition. Stories that give hope to others that what we are working towards is possible. Stories that show in the midst of tragedy, hope is possible if people of courage step forward. Now, there are two stories I want to focus on. The first one is Catherine Schiavone and Alexander Strasser. This one particularly touches my heart, and as well as connected in a very small way to this congregation. Catherine and Alexander were Jewish children who escaped Nazi Europe during World War II with the help of the Unitarian Service Committee, which is the forerunner of the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. I've mentioned it before in probably last year's USC service, that one of our congregation's previous ministers, Waitstill Sharp, left his position as a parish minister in Massachusetts, and he and his wife went to Europe during World War II, acting clandestinely to save these two and many other children as part of their work for the Unitarian Service Committee. And this is really how UUSC got started, saving children in crisis. And I want you to think about that. How many of us would go to Syria today, or even to the Mexican-American border to help refugees trying to escape certain death from their home countries? I was reconnected to this story as part of my mentoring and tutoring as part of our social justice at-risk youth program. It's a program for youth who are in lockdown facilities or lock-up facilities at the Annie Whittemire complex just down the road from here. And many of these youth are even though they're locked up, they are we sort of have a bias about the type of person they are. But really, when you sit with them and talk with them, many of them are very, very smart, perceptive youth. But one common denominator seems to be they come from an unstable family environment. And interestingly, one of the books that was assigned to them to read was a book called Sarah's Key. So I read it so I could have something to talk to them about. And it is the story based in 1941 France, when the French police rounded up 13,000 Jews, including 4,000 children, the French police, and shipped them to Auschwitz to die. It's told the story of how neighbors turned in neighbors and how Jewish homes were looted and taken over by their fellow country people once they were sent away. And also not to be forgotten as part of the story is a family who takes in the protagonist of the book and shelters her at the risk of their own lives. In a letter, Sarah, the Sarah of Sarah's Key, writes, Zakor al tekha, remember, never forget. Yet, to be honest, this story of the French rounding up of their neighbors was one that is not taught in the French schools, let alone in the American schools. It's easy to forget what we do not know in the first place as the generations continue. So we must become informed. And although we may say, well, that is Europe, we do not do that here, I want to remind you of two things. First, we could have saved many more Jews from the Nazis' ovens, but we refused to take them into this country. And second, it did and it does happen here in America. It came to light recently, actually, that certain school textbooks called Africans who were enslaved workers, not slaves. It's very easy to forget the long history of what we have done to our neighbors, people we identified as other, just as the French considered the Jews others. Indigenous peoples whose lands we conquered, African lives stolen into slavery that propelled many in this country to wealth. Child labor, which was common in this country until labor abuses became so widespread that the people connected with each other and worked and sacrificed to create change. But just like the French, for a long time in our history, right in front of our eyes, people living amongst us, sent away, killed, enslaved. Even today, we have slavery. Just talk to the human trafficking people in town, and you will find there is slavery still today. And we could say, well, that was a long time ago, but it is still today. I will tell you also, for the last 30 years, we've been arresting and imprisoning a disproportionately large number of young adults of color for minor, non-violent offenses. And just as the Jews were forced to live in the ghettos before and during World War II, this mass incarceration has led to ghettos where the cycle of poverty are continuing due to the breaking up of the family and the economic distress caused by incarceration and the cutting back of resources and opportunities for poor people of color. And just like the Jews, when people are arrested for drugs, we loot them by taking away their assets and their homes. There actually is a law in this country, just as it was the law in France in 1942, just as slavery was the law, just as segregation and discrimination was the law prior to the 1960s. Today it is the law. We are, as Martha was telling you, we are locking up parents and children, our neighbors, people who have lived in this country sometimes for years, others trying to get into this country. We are taking them out of their homes and placing them in detention centers, merely because the parent was not born in this country. It's the law. It's legal. Locking up innocent children is legal in this country. And these people came here just as my grandparents came to America, hoping for a better life, fleeing oppression and persecution in their home country. But then, we as a country changed the law to make it illegal to do, and by so doing, we condemn people to prison, and we condemn them to death. We sit here and we allow this to happen. Which is why I want to focus on the second story of hope. Lillian, who happens to be the same name as my immigrant grandmother, and her 8-year-old son Jose, who were trying to escape the violence in Honduras and were arrested and put in a private detention center for 10 months. 10 months of inadequate medical care and malnutrition, 10 months of abuse and ever-present threat of solitary confinement, 10 months of living with fear of sexual assault, 10 months of treatment so unconscionable it provoked at least one suicide attempt by a fellow prisoner and drove Lillian and other women to go on hunger strikes. I'm quoting this from the Stories of Hope. 10 months of wondering whether she lost all hope for her son's future. End quote. So there was a sense of hopelessness there. But UUSC then entered the picture and partnered with this nonprofit legal organization that helps refugees. And now Lillian and her son are living with family in New York. With knowledge, with courage, we can act to help people change the course of their lives. And that is what the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee does. They provide active and sustainable help for people in crisis. And by doing so, we create through our actions hope to the seemingly hopeless. And that sort of builds upon itself. For once we see others, right, and others see it happening, it gives us hope that we can do something to help. Hope is not just some blind optimism where we close our eyes to the world's problems and wish upon a star. No, hope, I would tell you, is a theological premise based on our inner sense of compassion for other human beings, our awareness of our capacity to heal others, and our faith that even knowing our history, that we can learn from it and not turn away that the next time that they come for our neighbors. And when we ask who is our neighbor, as Jesus did, our neighbor is the youth at Wittenmeyer. It is the single parent from South Chicago. It is the family in Honduras. It is the Syrian refugees. They are all our neighbors. We are all one world. We just need to connect the dots. So let us not close our eyes to suffering, I implore you. Although the journey may be hard, let us take one more step on the way to creating hope in our lives and in the lives of others. Through our own lives, though our own lives may be troubled, let us connect with and walk one more step in another's shoes. And though our heart may be fearful, let us take one more step and be harbingers for a better day for all of humanity. May it be so.